everyone, and welcome to this week's video. This week I thought I'd show you one of my favourite colouring techniques by colouring one of the pieces that I did for my Plant Witch colouring book. This Plant Witch colouring book is still available up on my store if you are interested in getting a physical copy of this. There will be a link down below. But the piece that I'm doing here, I really wanted to do like a very warm toned piece, and I thought it'd be really good to talk about one of my favourite techniques when doing colouring, which is using markers and watercolours. I get asked about this technique quite a lot, and this is something that I really do love doing. When using markers, my biggest recommendation is to use the chisel nib when doing large areas. And when using the chisel, bullet, or even if you're using a brush pen, if you want to cover a large area without getting streaks, I recommend doing really small circular motions. This will help your marker spread evenly across the paper. Now, the best paper to use for markers, if you are just using markers alone, would be Bristol board, marker paper, or to be honest, I just use mixed media paper. Now, using watercolour paper will make your watercolours soak up the marker quite quickly, therefore draining your markers a lot quicker. Marker paper will help a marker shine much brighter, and Bristol board is that perfect medium in between of the flimsiness of marker paper and the grain that you get with mixed media paper. It's a very smooth surface. But the reason why I'm choosing mixed media paper in order to be able to use this piece, or do this piece in particular, and not use this piece, I don't know why I said that, is because it will allow me to use watercolours and let me use my polychromos, my pencil crayons on top of the markers. Now, why do we put a base down of marker before we put watercolours down? This is really simple. When you're using watercolours and you're putting down the base of watercolours, it's already putting a layer on the paper. So when you try to put a marker on top, there is nothing for the marker to sit down on, and you get an interesting effect like this one. Now, you can see that the marker doesn't quite sit on the paper properly, and this is because there is nothing for the marker to grip onto or to soak into because you've already put the watercolour down. So the best technique for this is to put a flat layer of marker down and then to add texture on top with watercolours. This will make a really beautiful effect. Now, you can get a very interesting effect by doing the opposite way, but this is the best way to use this method. It just makes it look a lot smoother, look a lot brighter, and overall you can get a nice effect that you don't get with markers alone. Now, I absolutely love using alcohol markers. It's a really good way to get bold, bright, graphical colours that you just can't seem to achieve with other mediums. Now, with gouache you can get a really nice even layer, but take some practice to do that, whereas alcohol markers you can get a really bright, very vibrant colour straight away. However, one of the downsides with using alcohol markers is that they are not pigmented. There are pigmented markers that are out there that are light fast, and what I mean by pigmented is I meant light fast, not pigmented. They're very pigmented, as you can see here. They aren't light fast, so they do not last as a medium over years. If you have the piece of paper up on a wall and it's in direct sunlight, it is unfortunately going to start to lose colour, and that is just the nature of alcohol markers. There are oil-based markers that you can use that do boast of light fastness, but in my experience, even Sharpies which are oil-based do eventually fade over time. So that can be the downside of using alcohol markers. But the good side is that if you do not want to use digital medium, this is a really good way to get bold colours. A lot of manga books, comic books, illustrations that you have seen over the years that were traditionally done would have been using alcohol markers, whether or not that be Copic, Winsor & Newton, whether or not that be many of the hundreds of brands of markers that are out there. There will be markers that they will use, or they will use watercolours, ink-based watercolours or inks to be able to achieve the effect that they wanted. It's that bright, bold colour that you're after to be able to get a really graphical effect. Now you can use alcohol markers in a very graphical way. You'll notice that I'm using a few blending techniques here, and this is a very simple way of being able to create gradients. What you want to do is you want to get your darkest to your lightest marker, and you want to have a medium colour that goes in between. You can oversaturate certain areas to be able to create a nice smooth gradient. As you would have seen when I was colouring the background, I was using the circle method. This is a really good way to achieve that gradient by slowly saturating over and over in certain areas. However, this can drain your markers much quicker. So that is a little thing there that I would say. I actually do prefer bullet nibs over brush tip markers, personally, because I find that I can blend better with bullet nib markers. Now, that's just a personal preference. Brush tip markers are fantastic for blending, but I find that the ink does run out a lot quicker with brush markers, which is when I switched over to bullet markers. Some of these markers I've had for years and I have not had any issues. So the next thing that we're going to work on is the watercolour layer. So you can see that I've put down my base with my markers, and now I'm going to build up textures with watercolours. This allows an illustration to not be so flat. Now you can achieve this as well with pencil crayons on top of the markers. Sometimes I like to combine all three to be able to achieve my desired effect, because sometimes I find that I can't achieve one thing through one medium alone. So being able to use watercolors, it means that I'm able to deepen my shading, able to make my blacks a little bit darker, a little bit lighter in certain areas, but please be aware that once you've put the marker down, it makes it very difficult to lift that colour back up. That is your permanent base colour. Watercolours are a little bit more forgiving because you can lift the colour up that you have put down. However, once you've put the marker down, that is your permanent base colour. So my always recommendation is, if you are using this method, to swatch your colours beforehand to see if you can get the desired effect that you are after. So I'm using wet on wet technique here, where I will put down a base of water and allow the colour to bleed and being on texture, especially in the fern area. I'm also using the watercolour to darken the hair, mainly because with my alcohol markers that I do have, the brand that I use is Winsor & Newton. It's one of my favourite alcohol brand markers to use. I've talked about it several times on this channel, but one of the things that I really do dislike about alcohol markers is sometimes I find that the colour range is very limited. Now, there are over 160 colours with Winsor & Newton markers. That's a lot of tones that you can get and a lot of tones that you can achieve in between blending markers. However, sometimes I find that no matter what the alcohol marker is, whether or not it is well, we always seem to have this debate on several channels, Copic markers, Ohuhu markers, Winsor & Newton, Spectrum Noir, Spectra Ad. There is hundreds of brands of markers out there, but one of my biggest gripes that I have with alcohol based markers is the lack of range of skin tones. Now, we do tend to get a lot of really pale, beautiful skin tones. You can achieve some really beautiful skin tones through using purples and browns and this, that and the other. But I find that the brown tones tend to be very limited. And this has been my experience with every brand of alcohol markers that I have used. They'll have a very nice range of pale skin tones, from very subtle pink to very yellowy pink, deeper pinks, and you have your orangey skin tones as well, and going into your browns. But your browns either tend to be very, very warm or very, very cool, and this can be a bit of a problem. And especially considering a lot of the alcohol markers in general don't tend to do very dark brown skin tones. So I'm actually able to use watercolors to be able to build up the textures to get the desired skin tone that I need. but I put down the base of the alcohol marker first and then build up the skin tone that I need. This is a technique that I've developed over time, mainly because I can never get the desired effect that I'm after. It builds up really nice texture as well. You'll also notice that I'm using the white gel pen just to enhance certain areas where, say, the line work wasn't quite the way I wanted it, to make some of the scales on the snake a little bit brighter and some of the jewellery pop a little bit more. You'll also notice as well I used a gold gel pen to be able to fill in the borders as well as certain parts of the jewellery, just to give it that little bit of sparkle that it didn't have before. So really hope that this explains the technique that I really love using. And the cat has come to say hi. Say hello, Bella. Come on. I really hope that this has been able to explain the technique that I use a little bit more. This is a technique that I've developed over time that I've really enjoyed using after seeing some people put it into action and trying and developing it myself. There's still a lot to learn when it comes to using this technique. I'm still not 100% there, but I find that if you ever feel that your markers are feeling a little bit flat for you, you can build some beautiful textures using watercolors on top of your markers. It's a really fun way of building up and making your illustration a little bit more lively than the graphical flat effect. So hopefully this has been helpful. Yet again, if you are interested in the Plant Witch colouring book, it is down below, and let me know if you wish to see more of these colouring tips and tricks videos in the future. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Make sure to draw, have lots of fun, and of course, folks, as always, stay creative.